Another month has come to an end, and that means it is once again time for a monthly reading wrap-up, this time for the month of April. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, if you're new here, hi, I'm Katie. I love talking about books, and that's what I do a lot of on my channel. I also talk a lot about hobbies sometimes too, and if you're not new here, welcome back. We're just gonna go ahead and jump right into things with some statistics. In the month of April, I read 7 books total. My genre breakdown was 2 romances, 1 graphic novel, 1 sci-fi, 1 historical fiction, 1 young adult, and 1 literary fiction. So I was honestly all over the place. And then as always, I will have my average rating and how many pages that I read in the month of April on screen right now as well. Overall, for the month of April, I feel like my genres being all over the place kind of perfectly parallels how the month was in general. I feel like a lot of the books I read, I had mixed or conflicting feelings on, or I just didn't really love or connect with, unfortunately. I didn't have any crazy standout books. Like, there were still books that I liked and enjoyed, but they weren't any favorites, unfortunately. And you know what? Sometimes as a reader, that's just how the cookie crumbles. I feel like I started the year off really well. I had a lot of great books that I was reading 5 stars almost all over the place. And I feel like in order to appreciate the 5 stars, sometimes we gotta have books that we just don't love as much, and that's okay. The first book that I read in the month of April was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Everybody's probably tired of people talking about this book by now, just because everybody's been reading it over the past few months to a year because of the movie coming out. And speaking of the movie, I ended up reading this book and watching the movie and comparing them a little bit in an Ultimate Book video that I posted a few weeks ago. So if you guys are interested in watching that, I'll have it linked down below, along with any of the other books that I read in reading vlogs that I'm going to talk about in today's video. But today we're just going to be talking about the book though. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir is following our main character, Ryland Grace. And he wakes up one day and he's just in space. And he's like, how in the heck did I get here? What is going on? And this book is told through a non-linear storyline format. So you're going back and forth. You have him present day. He's trying to recount his memories, and then you're going back to his memories with him and experiencing and learning slowly throughout the story why he is there and why he was chosen to go on this very important life-altering mission. Actually, not just life-altering, world-altering. Going into this, I really wasn't expecting this book to be as funny as it was. There are so many little witty quips and jokes in here that were very refreshing, especially because this book does talk a lot of science. This book is very in-your-face science, and I feel like personally for me, it just didn't really work at times. I like to really understand what I'm reading, and not that I had to understand everything that he was saying science-wise in here, but at the same time, it was talked about so much that it led me to being like a little bit confused and just a teensy bit frustrated, because I feel like at the end of the day, it kind of took away from the whole heart of the story. I also feel like we spent a lot of this book inside Ryland Grace's mind. So we got a lot of internal dialogue, which also isn't necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't always excite me to just be in one person's brain for almost an entire book. There were a little bit of pacing problems for me in this book because of that, but when we were going back in time and he was having conversations with people, and eventually whenever a new character got added to the book in the present day, I feel like I started to enjoy the book a lot more and I was understanding its charm. And this book overall, minus the science stuff, has so much heart and soul and personality. It was so sweet and honestly wholesome, and I really was not expecting that out of a sci-fi book. And you really go through a journey with these characters. By the end, you see Ryland Grace change throughout the book, and it was such a beautiful growth journey to be able to read about. For the most part, I ended up reading this immersively, and I think that's probably the best way to read it. So I highly recommend getting the audiobook if you can. The audiobook is phenomenal. I feel like being able to hear the jokes and the characters interact and all the different voices of everything, it really helps it come to life. And I'm really glad that I read the book before I watched the movie, because I feel like there was so much context in here that the movie left out. And I'm not going to go too much into the movie versus the book now, but I feel like the movie and the book complement each other so incredibly well. I did enjoy this. I liked it quite a bit. It's just not an absolute favorite book for me. I think I would probably just rate this a 4-star, which is still a really good book. I still liked it again, but unfortunately not an absolute favorite for me. If it is for you, I am very happy for you, however. After that, I ended up reading Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This is following our main character, Asa, and she has OCD. And I feel like the one thing that felt very realistic to me was the OCD representation in this book. I don't personally have OCD, but I am very close with somebody who has been diagnosed with it, and she herself said that this was a very accurate representation. And obviously OCD is different for everybody who has it, but it was a good experience for me to be able to understand on a more firsthand level how somebody's mind with OCD does work. And the basic plot of this one is that Asa and her best friend Daisy are trying to investigate this case about a mysterious billionaire, and Asa was actually friends with the billionaire's son. And they haven't talked for years, but through this, they end up becoming reacquainted. And the reason why they're getting involved in this mystery in the first place is because they want to win a ton of money, which, like, who wouldn't? Like, I feel you, girls. However, the story itself to me just felt very juvenile, and I know that I'm getting older and I feel like I'm slowly starting to age out of young adult books. And the main reason why I wanted to read this was for the OCD representation, so I did get a lot out of it in that way, like I already said. But I feel like otherwise, the storytelling itself and where the plot was going was just kind of a mess. And I do understand that these main characters are teenagers, so they're going to make silly mistakes, but at the same time, there were a few instances where our main character's best friend, Daisy, ended up making Asa feel bad for having OCD, and she like called her a bad friend. I don't know. That was just really weird to me. It made me feel icky, and it kind of just felt like a lot of the people in her life weren't willing to accept Asa for who she was and weren't even trying to understand her. And in all honesty, that made me feel quite frustrated with the characters a lot of the times. And there was just also a lot of like random plot things here and there that just didn't really mean anything. And I don't know. I feel like this is definitely worth a read if you're trying to understand OCD better, but otherwise, it's not really anything special in my opinion. I think just for the OCD rep, I would probably rate this a 3-star. Otherwise though, it's not really worth the read in my opinion. Maybe if you're younger, but I feel like if you're in your early to mid 20s, this just might not be a book that is for you in your time of life anymore. Also with John Green in general, I just don't really think his books are for me anymore. I read Looking for Alaska, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and I didn't really love that one either. I don't know exactly what it is about his writing and his storytelling that doesn't really click with me, but I just personally don't really love his books. Although I will say that only goes for his fiction books. His non-fiction book, Everything is Tuberculosis, was fantastic. The next book I read was on my Kindle. It was actually on Kindle Unlimited, and it was a part of the Windy City series, but it was a new spin-off, and it's called In Her Own League. This is Liz Tomforde's most recent book. I believe it came out in March of this year. And the reason why this is a Windy City series spin-off, it is of course set in Chicago still. It's a sports romance. We're following our main character, Monty, and he is the coach of the Windy City Warriors, which is the baseball team that the two brothers from the Windy City series, Kai and Isaiah Rhodes, play for. And he was a huge recurring character in those books, so it was really cool to be able to see Monty's story with him falling in love with Reese Remington, who is actually his boss, crazily enough. Reese is the brand new owner of the Windy City Warriors, and she is the first ever MLB team owner that is a woman, so period queen. We absolutely love to see women in male-dominated fields, and this is also a dual POV book. Monty is in his late 40s, and Reese is in her early 30s, if I'm remembering correctly. And their whole dynamic is that it's a very unrequited love, obviously, because Monty is Reese's employee, so it's very frowned upon, especially because she is the only female owner, so she's gonna get a lot about press if they end up getting together, but they have this like undeniable tension. And I feel like one of my biggest gripes with this book is that a lot of their feelings for one another were kind of just very lust forward. It did feel a little bit insta-lovey, but then I had to remind myself that these characters were familiar with each other for a lot of months prior to when this book was written, because they had a previous season together, or at least some of the previous baseball season together. So they were already previously acquainted for quite some time. And you know what? If we're being honest, a lot of other romance books, they be moving faster than that. They get together in like a month, maybe even sooner. So I can't completely hold that against this book, and they do end up having very deep, meaningful feelings for each other as well. But I think overall, this just wasn't my favorite book from Liz Tomforde. I think one thing that I've started to realize with Liz Tomforde's books, I've read 6 of her books in less than a year. They are a blast. They are a super fun and great time. They're the perfect palate cleansers, and if you're in the mood for that, she will deliver. And I do have my favorite books from her, but the ones that haven't been favorites are the ones that I've realized are just a little too long, or we get too much repetition throughout the book. And it's not like themes or certain ideas coming up. It's like one thing is said and then a page later that same thing is said, maybe in a little bit of a different way, which isn't necessarily a really like bad or awful thing to happen. It's just something that I've noticed. And unfortunately, this book by her did have those traits. It almost just feels like, with the repetitiveness and with them feeling a little too long and dragged out storyline wise, that some of her books just aren't as edited. And I feel like, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, honestly. And I will just say that I don't think that this is Liz Tomforde's fault, but I feel like a lot of books that are gaining popularity on Book Talk, they're not being edited or carefully crafted as much as they were from the book that gained the popularity. When I think about a lot of series in particular, if I absolutely love the first book and then the rest of the series is not as good, like it doesn't even stand up to the first book at all, I feel like that there's an issue. There's something weird going on here, because I feel like it's just happening way too much recently. And obviously Book Talk is amazing. It's got so many people into reading. I think it definitely played a huge part into me getting into reading as well as an adult. But at the same time, I feel like we're just trying to push out these bestsellers one by one because people want to read, which again is great. But we also want the books to be the best versions of themselves and not be rushed to print. Going back to Inner Only specifically though, I feel like my favorite part of this book was seeing people from the Windy City series. I feel like that's the most excited I felt while reading, and I feel like because of that, this just isn't one of my favorite books by her. I'd probably rate it a 3.5. It was still a very fun, spicy, great time. It's just not one that I'm gonna think about a lot afterwards. The next two books I ended up reading, I read in my last video, which was the TBR tournament. It was the first episode of a new series that I'm doing, so make sure to be caught up on that video before the next one comes out. Anyways, the first book I read in that video was The Women by Kristin Hannah. You guys know I love me some Kristin Hannah. This is a historical fiction novel that is set during the time of the Vietnam War, so the 1960s and 70s. And we're following our main character, Frankie, who ends up volunteering to be a nurse in the Vietnam War. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. This book was very heavy. It was very dark. There was quite a bit of gore at times, obviously, because Frankie was seeing a lot of the worst of the injuries that the soldiers were having during the war because she was trying to help them. I think my favorite thing out of this book was the friendship between Frankie and the other nurses that she was in Vietnam with, Ethel and Barb. It's just such a real friendship, and throughout the book you get to see them support one another and understand each other like nobody else really does. Like they just have such a good friendship. And I feel like it's honestly just the type of friendship that everybody strives for, but it's also done in a very realistic way, which I appreciated. I feel like Kristin Hannah writes female friendship so well in so many different ways. I will say, however, this is not my favorite Kristin Hannah book. Even me saying that though, I still did really like and enjoy and appreciate the story, but all of her other books that I've read have been 5 stars. And this one, in my opinion, just didn't quite live up to these other ones. One of the things that I really wish would have been included was other women's POVs. I said this in my reading vlog and I'll say it again. It is called The Women, not The Woman. Frankie herself is a very privileged person. She comes from a lot of money. Her family is very supportive in general. They're very involved in her life. And I feel like that's just not a very realistic depiction of what a lot of veterans end up coming home to, especially a lot of those after the Vietnam War. Frankie was still not treated the best, obviously, and it was crazy to see how women in general were treated after the Vietnam War. Those who were nurses, and they would say they were veterans, they would say they're looking for support, and they were literally met with, there were no women in Nam. Brother, they were just saving lives, no big deal, I guess. But going back to Frankie, I feel like because of Frankie's privilege, we only got to see so much of a veteran's point of view, especially a women veteran, and I feel like because of that, I would have loved to see Barb and Ethel's experiences, or just other women's POVs, even a one-off POV like in fantasy books where there's just so many POVs, you're like, what the heck is going on? And then when it clicks, you're like, wow, this is the best book I've ever read. I love getting as many POVs as I can because I feel like it helps me fully understand the world, and it helps me feel like I'm there, like in that moment. It makes everything feel realer. And I love whenever books feel that way. And I feel like because we didn't get more POVs in this book, this storyline was definitely limited. But at the same time, even me saying that, I don't want to downgrade Frankie's story because I still did enjoy it. When it comes to Frankie's romantic relationships though in this book, they were just way too focused on. I would have been a lot more interested in, again, seeing other POVs or just seeing Frankie going through other things and experiences or having other friendships in her life, rather than really putting all her worth, it kind of felt like, into romance. It just felt like we spent way too much time on that. When I was wanting to focus more on the women, not focus on just their romantic relationships, because women are more than that. As I think that the ending was wrapped up too perfectly in a bow. There was like a character that was almost used as a plot device that just like didn't really make any sense and had me questioning a lot of things, and I didn't really love that. And it's really weird for me to have these feelings about a Kristin Hannah book. I know, I'm shocked too. And I do a lot of yapping about this book in that reading vlog, so if you want to hear more, you can watch that. But I feel like because of all those things that I've said, this is a 4-star for me, which again, obviously isn't a bad book. I still did enjoy it. There were times that I was tearing up, but it's just not a new favorite Kristin Hannah. I do eventually want to read everything she's ever written, so I know that I'm not going to connect fully with every single book, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, 3 out of 4 of the books that I've read by her have been 5 stars so far. Like, that's kind of crazy. There's probably only 1 or 2 other authors that I could say that for. The other book I ended up reading in the TBR tournament video was I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. This is a literary fiction dystopian novel, and we're following our main character, Rainy, and the story itself is written like Rainy, the main character, is telling you the story of what's happening. It's set in the not too far future where the world that he lives in has been kind of broken down by climate change and societal collapse. One thing leads to another, and he ends up having to leave his home and run away for his own safety. So he sets sail on Lake Superior, and it ends up becoming this whole adventure. I would break this book up into thirds. The first part is before he ends up setting sail. The second part is he's setting sail, and then the third part is its own separate thing. And I would say my favorite part about this book was probably the first part. I didn't mind the third part, but the second part, we spend so much time inside Rainy's head because he does spend a lot of the second part alone. And like I said for Project Hail Mary, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but because of Leif Enger's writing style, he is definitely a teller, not a shower. There was just so many times while I was reading the second part specifically where I just kind of didn't really care that much. I had lost my interest in the storyline, and I just wasn't really engaged in the book. And even though I said I liked the first part of the book the most out of the entire book, the pacing was still quite slow, and I feel like the pacing does kind of keep that same slow theme throughout the book. I did like Rainy as a main character. He just seems like a nice guy. He always wants to do the right thing. He's just there for people. He cares. And I feel like the dystopian world that we were living in and trying to figure out more about it was the one thing that was really keeping me wanting to read, because I wanted to know more about the world. I wanted more context. And we end up finding things out and experiencing things in this world while Rainy experiences them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But by the time we got to the end, I was starting to realize that I didn't know enough, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to be world dumped at. And I feel like because Leif Enger's writing style definitely errs more on the side of flowery than concise and clean, it definitely felt like it got in the way of a lot of things that were going to end up happening. I just feel like this book was kind of a mess, and I know that it is said that it's an apocalyptic novel, so maybe it's meant to be that way. But at the same time, it being messy itself and the way that it's told doesn't totally justify or make up for the other things that I feel like this book is lacking. Like, just in general, I feel like I wanted more context with the political world, like I already said. I wanted more context on our characters. I wanted to know more about the ending and how everything ended up happening. Like, Rainy literally said himself, I don't know how it ended up happening. It got explained to me later, and then he doesn't tell you in the story. What are we doing? I think that the premise of this book was great. I just don't think that it was executed in the most accessible way. But I feel like because of the topics at hand, I feel like it's very important for stories like these to be more accessible, and not just in the way he wrote it either. It just wasn't executed in a very satisfying way at the end either. A lot of loose ends were just kind of sitting there, not tied up, which was quite frustrating. And I feel like even though this book was incredibly dark, it still had a hopeful tone to it. The way that Rainy was telling the story almost felt like a children's story, weirdly enough, even though it's definitely adult content. I just wanted so much more about this book because this book is literally about what could happen if we don't all start looking out for one another more. And I feel like that's an incredibly important book to read right now, especially in society today. So I don't know. I expected more, and I unfortunately was let down. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna rate this. I'm thinking maybe like a 3-star, maybe a 2.5. I don't know. This book unfortunately just let me down quite a bit. The next book I read was the 3rd graphic novel in the Leif graphic novel series. This one's called The Dark Times. These are by Probert. In this series, we're following our main character byeee, and she ends up becoming unlikely friends with this other character named Cad, and they end up going on an adventure together throughout these graphic novels to ultimately save the world that they live in and just make it a better place to live. These are very cute and wholesome. They're just a really good time. This is probably my favorite in the series so far. I feel like with graphic novels, it takes 1 or 2, even 3 sometimes for me to fully get into it, just because because you do normally get less story told in them, because this one is under 250 pages and most of it is art. It's just a different style of book, but I do love graphic novels, and might I just said the art in here is fantastic. Every single graphic novel that I've read so far in adulthood, even if they are for children or young adults, the art has been absolutely phenomenal. Also, if you have any other good graphic novel recommendations for me, I would love some recommendations because I am almost caught up on the series. The fourth one just recently came out in April, so I'm gonna read that whenever I get my library hold in. But otherwise, I don't have any other graphic novels on my radar right now, so I would love some of your recommendations. I think one of my favorite things about this series is how our main character B is depicted having anxiety. I just feel like the way that it's illustrated is very interesting, and I feel like it's really important for children and young adults to be reading things with anxiety representation like this. And even I, as an adult with anxiety, am getting something out of it, and I feel a little bit seen. I think I would rate this third one a 4 stars. It's still really fun. It's a great time. Not my favorite graphic novel series, but I still do really like it. After that, I read Next of Kin by Hannah Bonam-Young. I actually just finished this last night, so my thoughts are very fresh. We're following our main character, Chloe, and she ends up getting a call way out of the blue that her birth mother ended up having another baby and wants her to take over care for that fresh newborn baby. It's called Next of Kin care. And in order to qualify as a Next of Kin guardian, she ends up having to team up with somebody else through CPS, but she doesn't have enough income, but she does have enough space in her apartment. And because of that, these people are going to be moving in with her, and those people end up also being a part of the Next of Kin program. They are our male main character Warren and his 15-year-old brother Luke. I feel like the first 150 pages of this book, I was locked in. I was like, is this gonna be my new favorite romance? I'm loving this. And then as we kept reading, the story just kind of fell off a little bit. There wasn't really anything really else to build up to, which kind of made me feel a little bit disappointed because I was loving it so much at first. And this book is actually pretty short. It's under 300 pages. But I feel like because of the way that the storyline kind of fell off for me, it honestly could have been even shorter. I really liked Chloe as a main character. I found myself connecting to her quite a bit. She's been through so much. Her mother, both her mothers actually, her birth mother and her adoptive mother, she's had very rough relationships with. And you can really feel Chloe's struggle and frustration with both of them throughout the book. And there was many times throughout this book where Chloe was just going through it, and like I couldn't help but feel for her. There were many times that I actually teared up during this book. I think that Warren overall wasn't a fully fleshed out character in my opinion. It kind of felt like their relationship started almost out of nowhere, especially from where we begin with their relationship in this book, because at first he's like, I don't want to be your friend, let's be all separate. And then all of a sudden he's just like down to clown and be besties. So to me that felt kind of abrupt. I did like them whenever they ended up getting together. I thought that they were very nice to each other and supportive, and they understood each other's struggles like nobody else really did because they've been through so many similar things in life. I do, however, think a lot about Warren was written almost too perfectly. Like he always said the exact right things, and I feel like that's not completely realistic. I mean, I know it's a romance book, but still, I don't know. I feel like I like my male main characters just a little bit flawed. There were so many heartwarming parts of this story though. Warren's younger brother, Luke, he's deaf, and Chloe actually knows how to sign because her father is deaf. And I feel like Hannah Bonam-Young always has great representation in her books, and I always love reading her books because of that, and watching how they interact together with sign just made me smile. And I feel like overall this book was really cute, and there is a little bit of spice, and there's also a lot of deeper moments, a lot of real things that these people in this book are going through. And I feel like Hannah Bonam-Young toes all these lines so well. She can talk about the deeper things. She can really get into the nitty-gritty of some real life experiences people might have and relate to, but then she also has these cute relationshipy moments. She has these funny moments. She has the found family. And so because of that, I really did like it. I really enjoy her books and her writing overall. I think I'm gonna rate this a 4 star. Definitely a solid romance and a fun time. I would recommend it, and I think I want to read the next one in the series too. I cannot believe I let this sit on my TBR cart for so long. And there you have it. Those are all 7 of the books that I read in the month of April. If you guys have any thoughts on these books, let's chat about them in the comments down below. And also, if you watched until this far in the video, comment down below the coffee cup emoji so I know who the real ones are who watched until the very end. And I think that's going to be it for today's video. I love you guys so much. Hope you're all having an amazing day, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys. This book